The 690th edition of the Four Corners podcast starts right now.
This is the Four Corners podcast.
Elton ready on his second attempt. That one is no good. They battle for it. Loose ball. Recovered Marvin. He scores. 17-second clip. And he was fouled. Here we go. Lawson with a runner. No. The rebound. Hansbrough at the gun. Got it.
They were 4 for 24.
Hansbrough on a switch on Paulus. A deep three. And Green rips down the rebound in traffic. 4-on-1.
What a great job. What a terrific job in transition. I mean, you couldn't plan that any better as a coach.
Tipped away by Johnson. It's loose. Page. Johnson.
They're dancing in the aisles. They're high-fiving. They're celebrating. They're going bananas on Franklin Street.
Pass to Britt, 15 seconds to play. Up high to Page, gets a screen from Meeks. Page driving in on the left, high off the glass for 2. 6 seconds to go. Pinson comes front court. Pinson to May for the win. Got it! Luke May! He got it! 0.3 of a second! Luke May gives Carolina the 75-73 lead. Are you kidding? Into Dixon. Boozer switches onto him. Dixon the kick. Trimble! Got it! And Carolina wins it!
Here are your hosts, Josh Marlowe and Anthony Pagnotta.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Four Corners podcast. We are powered by Carolina Electrical Services, live on Selection Sunday night, about 3 hours or so after we got the bracket during the CBS selection show, which gave Carolina their seed. It gave Carolina their first round matchup. It gave Carolina their bracket and their path to a second weekend if they want to go on a run and make the Final Four. And we're here to talk about all that and a whole lot more on tonight's edition of the podcast. As it's Christmas in March, if you're a college basketball fan, for my money, this is my favorite sports day of the year. That leads into my favorite sporting event of the year. And I think, we were talking about it earlier today. The vibes are maybe not where you want to be. The belief is not where you want to be entering this event, but no other sporting event allows you a chance to rewrite your story like the NCAA tournament. And if Carolina were to go on some sort of a run here, it would make us rethink about all the things we've talked about during the season. That's the beauty of the tournament. What I hate about the tournament is that's how the basketball season is viewed. So the 6 months that it takes to get here, a lot of people just kind of throw away because we kind of put what teams do into a 3-week time capsule. But if Carolina performs well in the next 3 weeks, we will look back on this season a lot differently than the way we are sitting here right now. Let's go ahead and get right into this thing. No pod thought of the day for this one, just straight into all the fallout from Selection Sunday. Carolina, the Heels, they earn a 6 seed in the South region. So they fall right where we thought they were going to be when we previewed Selection Sunday earlier this afternoon. And they end up in the South. More importantly, they will play their first round matchup in Greenville, which is not Carolina's backyard, but you expect a large Tar Heel contingent to be on hand for that matchup. It's also the same place where Carolina started their 2016-2017 run to the national championship. That also started in Greenville. Before we get into more stats and everything regarding Carolina's latest NCAA tournament berth. Your initial thoughts on the Heels coming in on that 6th line, and more importantly, winding up playing in Greenville, which is something we've been tracking for the last month or so. Whenever we would look at bracketology, it felt like going into today, that's not where Carolina was going to be. We had Oklahoma City as a spot. We had Pittsburgh as a spot, but ultimately the Heels get the 6th line like they were projected to get, but they get a region that benefits them as opposed to travel, to a different time zone or travel to a part of the country where they maybe would not have the fan support like they will have on Thursday at Bon Secours Wellness Arena.
Yeah, no, it's great. I mean, to draw the 6th seed, they were the second 6th seed as well. If you go by the seedings list that was put out officially after everything was all said and done, Carolina was the second 6th seed. So they were closer to being a 5 seed than they were to being a 7 seed, which does shock me a little bit, especially when you saw that Miami was on the 7 line. I thought, oh boy, they made it deeper than Carolina did. They finished with a better conference record than Carolina did. And ultimately, when it comes down to it, it's because of the way that Carolina scheduled in the non-conference. Even though we thought that Carolina went light with some of the non-conference scheduling that they had, you got to remember that they beat Kansas, they beat Kentucky, and they beat Ohio State. So all teams that were in the field, Carolina took care of business against those teams when they had to. The only one they didn't was Michigan State. And so when it comes down to it, this was ultimately the right way to go for Carolina. It got them still the quad 1 wins that were needed. It gained Carolina a lot of confidence and got them the type of record that they needed to be on the 6th line. And so ultimately, I think it's a good day. It's a good day for where Carolina could have possibly been, because we were thinking that Carolina was going to be probably on that 6th line, but they would end up having to, potentially go out west. We thought there was a chance that Carolina was, potentially going to be in Oklahoma City, Portland, somewhere like that. They end up getting Greenville. And, now, I mean, look, there are going to be Duke fans that are going to be there. So you will have some of the opposing fan base that will basically be in the building for your first round matchup against VCU. You will have some of those boo birds that will be out when Carolina ultimately takes the court, but you are going to have a lot of Carolina fans that are going to make the trip down to Greenville as well. So I think Carolina kind of needed that a little bit. Now, the thing that you can counter with is, well, there were a decent amount of Carolina fans in Charlotte as well, and look at how that showed up. I do think that this is going to be a much better environment, though, because it is the NCAA tournament. You don't have Clemson that's going to be there, and you won't have you won't have as many holdover Duke fans probably as you would think, because Carolina will be in that night session. So hopefully that's how it works out for Carolina. If it does and they end up getting a little bit of a home environment, I think it's going to play out very well for Carolina in terms of that first round matchup. That second round matchup, we'll have to wait and see, but love the destination for Carolina. Love the fact that they are on the 6th line and didn't have to fall onto that 7 line.
And they'll play Thursday at 6:50 scheduled tip time on TNT. So they'll play in the second window, if you will, of the first day of the NCAA tournament. They won't be on national TV, but they will be on TNT at 6:50. That's the scheduled tip time as of right now for Carolina and VCU. You look at Carolina's NCAA tournament history. This is the 55th NCAA tournament Carolina has competed in, the second most of all time. They have won 134 NCAA tournament games. That's also the second most all time. They have 6 NCAA tournament national championships, and they've made an NCAA record 21 Final Fours. Under Hubert Davis, Carolina is 8-3 in the NCAA tournament. They have won at least one game in each of the previous 3 tournaments under Hubert Davis. And in the current field of tournament teams, Carolina went 7-6. So they have a winning record in games against teams that made this year's event. They will play, as we mentioned, number 11 VCU. The Rams come out of the A10 and they enter this event the hottest of any team from the mid-major perspective, having won 16 out of 17. But an interesting note about VCU, we're not going to do a full deep dive on the Rams. That'll be when we do our VCU preview. I will actually go back and rewatch the A10 title game in depth. We were recording during that game earlier today. I will go back, rewatch that game in full in preparation of our preview game against them, but our preview pod against them. But they've won 16 of 17. But according to the chairman selection committee, had they not won the A10 tournament, they would not have made the NCAA tournament. So it's very odd that Carolina gets an opponent that, quite frankly, should be in Dayton, but they put VCU into the field without having to play a play-in game, and they are 27-7 on the season. And look, if you're a longtime fan of college basketball, you know the track record and the success of this program in this event. They're not a stranger to winning games in March. They're not a stranger to making deep runs in March, and they're not a stranger to having to beat Tobacco Road schools to do so. Look at what they did back in 2007 when they beat Duke. I believe that was also in a 6-11 game that was being played in Tampa. Of course, they've made their run to the Final Four back in 2011. They went from the first four to the Final Four. And even since then, this has been a program that routinely makes the field and is very competitive, despite coming from what has become traditionally now a 1 or 2 bid league conference in the A10. And I think we saw them on some of the projections that we did back earlier in this afternoon. But I do think from certain matchup styles and perspectives, this might have been a more favorable matchup than some other teams that Carolina could have drawn, like a South Florida, who I think is poised to make some noise in the NCAA tournament. And when you fall on the 6-11 line, you typically that's typically a game where you see there being a first 4 game and then they move on. And usually that's where you get a team that wins a game in Dayton. They then win a round of 64 game and they get hot and make the second weekend. Carolina avoids that as well, which I do think could be a benefit to them, not having a team that's already got some confidence when they show up for their first round matchup. So initial thoughts on VCU being the round of 64 opponent compared to what we were maybe looking at back earlier this afternoon when we looked at 5 different mocks that gave us 5 different opponents.
Yeah, don't honestly hate this one at all. Some of the other ones that you could have drawn, I think, would have been much tougher. And so I think ultimately, if you're Carolina, this is an advantageous spot for you, being that you are in Greenville. There will be, a decent amount of VCU fans that will probably make the trip. So it's not the easiest that you've ever faced before. But I do think that this is certainly one of the better matchups for Carolina amongst the 11 seeds. I mean, you talk about, none of the play-in games they were going to give you because you do have 2 ACC teams that are in those play-in games. They're not going to have an ACC matchup in the first round. But even if so, Texas, NC State, I mean, yeah, I think, those matchups, if you could have gotten Texas, maybe that would have been a more desirable matchup, even though they're one of the better offensive teams in the country. Miami of Ohio, another team that's very good offensively that you could have possibly drawn. They were actually the team that just missed out on making it into the field. They were apparently, according to the committee chair, they were the first team that was left out or that was chosen to go to Dayton. They were not the last team in the field, although the seed list that was released by the NCAA would tell a much different story. But maybe that's one that you would have liked to draw. But yes, South Florida absolutely wanted no part of them. I am so glad that Carolina stays away from them. And then, some of the other 12s that Carolina could have possibly seen jump up onto that line, like McNeese State, That certainly is not one that Carolina would have wanted to see with their ability to force turnovers. Akron, another team that I feel like is probably going to win their first round matchup against Texas Tech. So ultimately, I think it was pretty solid for Carolina. I mean, you early look at VCU. They are a team that scores the ball pretty well. Team that defends about middle of the road, in terms of points per game. But the thing is that, this is a team that's been there, done that before. This program has been in the NCAA tournament. They've had a lot of success, and just about any coach that rolls in there now is a successful coach. Now it's Phil Martelli Jr. that's in there. That name should sound very familiar because his dad, Phil Martelli Sr., incredibly successful career at the college level as well. The thing that you like about them, though, is that they're not a great rebounding team. That's certainly something that we're going to be talking about more when we break down the game. They are a good three-point shooting team, though, and they are a team that does a really good job in terms of contesting stuff at the rim. That certainly is something that Carolina is going to have to be aware of because they are 47th in the country in blocks per game with 4.4. So really what it is it's not the worst matchup that Carolina could have drawn, but it's still going to be a tricky matchup. I think there are a lot of people that I've seen on social media, a lot of these people probably hoping that it goes this way because they are hoping that a first-round exit means that Hubert Davis will be fired. A lot of people trying to make the argument that Carolina is going to be outmatched in this game. I don't see that. I see a game that Carolina should be able to win on paper, and so hopefully that's what ultimately ends up happening when Carolina takes the court on Thursday evening against the VCU Rams.
Yeah, look, this is a team that, when you got 16 of 17 wins coming in, they're not going to be lacking for confidence. And that one loss was a loss at St. Louis, where they built a double-digit lead in the first half before St. Louis does what St. Louis does. And they went on a big run at home and came back to win the game. That was the last time I saw VCU play where I was locked in. That was about 3.5-ish weeks or so ago. So that's why I will go back, rewatch their conference championship game to have a better feel for them going into this matchup with them on Thursday night. I thought it was really odd, or not really odd, but I was really surprised that this is the first ever matchup between these two programs. It felt like along the way that they would have maybe played, even if it was back in the 80s and the 90s, but that's not the case. And so this will be a first ever matchup for Carolina in the NCAA tournament. So I think that'll be a real cool part of this as well. Just a few more things, and then we'll get out of here. We're not going to spend too much time talking tonight because we have a preview show coming later in the week about the matchup. Ashton's analysis will be back tomorrow night to talk about Carolina and the NCAA tournament. And so we got a lot of content coming your way over the next 24, 48 hours or so. Did you ever think during the show that Carolina was going to be seeded differently? Because you see Miami that finishes third in the league, they come in on the 7 line. You see Louisville, who Carolina finished ahead of, they came in at a 6. But I think, Virginia coming in at a 3 showed that there was value in what the Who's did this year. Was there ever a thought, as we were watching the selection show together, hanging out at the radio station before we did our 2-hour show, was there ever a thought that maybe there was a chance that Carolina was going to be misseeded, something we talked about so much going in, that I thought Carolina's, resume at worst was a 6. I never once feared they were going to drop below that, but it sounded like, listening to you during the show, that there was a chance that Carolina could fall to a 7, and our good buddy and boss Colin Hoggard was even wondering out loud, could they fall in that 8-9 matchup in a certain region? Did you ever get that concerned about Carolina's potential and ultimate NCAA tournament seeding?
Not 8-9. 8-9 is crazy. That would have been, furious. Throne steak, that would have been just unbelievable, because at that point, you're basically saying that anything that Carolina accomplished is out the window because they lost Caleb Wilson. And I think this team has done enough without Caleb Wilson in terms of, I mean, I know now it doesn't look nearly as good that they're 5-3, but at one time they were 5-1 without Caleb Wilson. And so I thought to myself, the reason why I thought they could be on the 7 line, especially once I saw Miami on the 7 line, was Miami made it a step further in the ACC tournament. Miami beat Carolina during the regular season. And so I really thought, when I saw Miami, I said to myself, boy, this is, what is the committee doing here? But that was just one of the ones that the committee misseeded. We said it when we first saw St. John's as a team that was seeded as a 5 seed. Could not believe that. That is just a huge swing and a miss by this tournament committee. St. John's, we've watched them quite a few times throughout the year. They are so much better than a 5 seed. They are a team that just won the Big East. They deserve to be seeded higher. Same thing with Miami. And so when I saw Miami where they were, when I saw NC State where they were, I did start to get concerned and say, could I see Carolina being a 7 seed? I could see it possibly happening. The thing that I should have put more stock in, as you said, was Louisville being a 6 seed. Carolina beat them. They were a team that, I know Louisville had a decent resume themselves. Louisville's a team that got unbelievably overseeded. That's a team that should not have been on the 6th line. They probably should have been closer to the 8 line, if anything, based off of how they finished the season. This was not a great finish to the season for Louisville, but I think we should have probably put a little more stock in that. So, my confidence level wasn't the highest going in the tournament committee to put Carolina where they probably deserve to be, which was at that 6 seed spot. But it ends up working out. And again, they get a favorable draw to be in Greenville. So can't be too unhappy with the way that it worked out for Carolina, especially since I'm the one out of the two of us that does believe that the 3 seed might be a little bit more vulnerable than some of the other 3 seeds on the bracket.
Yeah, had Carolina been seeded differently, we would have spent the first 10 to 15 minutes yelling about that. And there are 2 things I look forward to Selection Sunday. It's seeing where my team is seated and identifying the first poorly misseeded team. And it took us, I think, 7 teams to get to that point? Because once I saw St. John's out of 5, I raised an eyebrow. This committee continues to prove they don't know how to seed certain teams. St. John's being a 5 and Louisville being a 6, and even Carolina being a 6, is a great representation of the misseeding that took place in this field. It's not as egregious as it's been in years past, but St. John's is probably the worst seeded team I can remember, really since I've got into the industry as a radio producer, podcast host, writer, so on and so forth. I think what helped Carolina's case were the wins that, even though Caleb Wilson's not on the court, you can't disvalue a home win over Duke, a home win over Kansas, and road wins at Virginia, at Kentucky, with home wins without Wilson over Louisville and Clemson. I think that really made their case, and the fact that all 8 of their losses have come in quad 1. They're under 500 in quad 1. They're 6-8, but they're 5-0 in quad 2. So you look at the first 2 quadrants, they're 11-0. Now, how could they have maybe had a better seed than a 6 seed with a 24-8 record? Maybe not play as many quad 3, quad 4 games. But we talked about that in the summer when we saw the schedule coming together, and we pushed back on it from a fan perspective and from a readiness perspective that, I thought that he should have scheduled harder. I also understood why Carolina scheduled the way they scheduled. This was a head coach that wants to play more games at home and knew he needed to put together a strong record to really cool off any conversation about his job being on the line. Although as we enter the tournament, that's quite frankly not the case. He's not on the hot seat, but you let them lose on Thursday, and that conversation is going to heat up in a real way. That would be something that I think, and we don't know how Carolina feels. We don't know if they feel that they got done wrong from a seating perspective, but if Hubert Davis feels that way, I think the message back to him would be you need to not play as many quad 3, quad 4 games, and if you play more quad 1, quad 2s, even if you were to lose them, there's still more benefit as opposed to winning games in the bottom 2 quadrants. But look, 6 is where Carolina was projected by virtually every bracketologist coming into today, and that's ultimately where Carolina ultimately winds up. So I do think for the most part, Carolina was seeded appropriately, and they were not discredited or seeded in a different way because they lost their best player. And so I do think for all my gripes that I have about the committee, and I have them, that is one that I do have to commend them for, because when you go all the way back to when he got officially injured a little over a week and a half ago, this was my biggest concern, was that now that he was officially out for the year, Carolina would be seeded as such, but Carolina was not. They get a 6 seed, and look, do they have a path to the second weekend? Absolutely. I don't like it. I am a lot higher on Illinois than you are. That's, after this weekend, they're now the number 2 offense in the country, according to KenPom. I just don't think that's a team matchup-wise Carolina matches up very well with. Their backcourt's better than ours, and that's what wins this time of the year. But with that being said, you got a more favorable 6-11 matchup than I would have thought maybe going in. Like I'd much rather see VCU than South Florida among some other some other 11s. And I do think of all the 3 seeds that Carolina could have maybe potentially got slotted up with. I do think you could look at you could look at Illinois and talk yourself into Carolina maybe getting by them. I don't think Carolina would have matched up well with Michigan State, a team that beat Carolina when they had Caleb Wilson. I don't know if Carolina Gonzaga would have been a great matchup, considering how accomplished of a player Grant Ike is, and the fact that Gonzaga flying under the radar. I think they're going to be really motivated. And then Carolina and Virginia, which they could have seen them in the second round. That's the earliest you can start to see matchup on or conference matchups take place. I don't think Carolina without Wilson matched up well with the Hoos, who competed really hard against Duke last night and had a chance to win an ACC tournament title. So the good news is it's all on the table for them. Like everything they want to do, everything they want to accomplish, it's now up to them. And that's the beauty of this event. But if the team that we saw in Charlotte just 72 hours ago is a team we see show up on Thursday night, that team will make it to Saturday. If the team that we saw played and compete at a high level against Louisville, played and competed at a high level against Clemson back at home, then this team could get to Saturday and maybe to the second weekend.
That's the thing. It's just get to Saturday and see what happens. See what Illinois team decides to show up, because Illinois has been one of those teams that in recent years they've had lofty expectations in March and they've come up short. That's one thing that unfortunately for Brad Underwood, has eluded him, has been that success in March. And so I think that's the reason why Carolina, as you mentioned, you went through all the different matchups. I don't think Carolina matches up great with any of those other teams, especially the teams that have size like Michigan State, like Gonzaga. And so I think that this is probably the best 3 matchup that Carolina could have gotten. But yeah, it's all about what team shows up. Are you actually seeing a team that comes out motivated, that's playing with the effort and the intensity that you need to see? I mean, I hope that's what you're going to see, but I thought you were going to see that. I thought you were going to see a level of desperation coming into the ACC tournament. I thought this would be a team that would be motivated to try to use this to gain some momentum going into the NCAA tournament. They looked like a team that didn't even look like they were interested in being in Charlotte. And so hopefully this is a much different type of mentality that they take to this game, because you're right. If they take the same mentality that they took to that Clemson game, or if they think they're going to roll the ball out and just find a way to be able to beat VCU, then they're going to get beat by this team, because VCU is one of the hotter mid-majors, as you mentioned earlier in the show, coming into this NCAA tournament. They are not a team that can be that should be messed with and taken lightly. And so Carolina's got to bring that intensity to the table. You need a strong game from Henry Vassar. You need a strong game from Seth Trimble. Those are going to be your guys that are going to lead you, and then everyone else has to follow in formation. But it all starts with that effort. It all starts with that intensity and that level of desperation that this team has to play with. They have to realize that unlike the ACC tournament, when you lose in this tournament, it's over. Your season is done. So, you've got to come in with the mindset that you're a team that can do some damage, but you got to come in with the mindset that you have to be careful of every opponent that you play. And so hopefully this team is confident in itself, because that's one thing that I just don't know about this group going into this matchup, is where their confidence level is without Caleb. I hope it's in the right spot, but it doesn't feel like it's in a great spot coming off of that ACC tournament. So hopefully they can prove us wrong, because I have them going out in the round of 32 in my bracket. I know you do as well. And so hopefully they show us a much different team, and one that we can believe in this coming weekend, starting on Thursday against VCU.
Yeah, we'll have to wait and see. It's up to them. It's up to them to write their story. How do they want this season to be remembered? Do they want it to be a season where it's a bunch of what ifs, and the whole conversation is, what if they wouldn't have lost Caleb? What if Hubert would have made the switch from Evans to Dixon earlier? Or do they maybe overachieve, and we get done with the season saying, I hated the way that it ended, but they gave us a memorable year with some wins that we'll remember for the rest of our lives as Carolina fans, and you just hate that it fell a little bit short of the ultimate goal. That's what I'm hoping for. I'd much rather have that on my plate, where this team gets to the second weekend and they get beat, as opposed to, God forbid, they lose on Thursday, they get to Saturday and get beat, and we're adding another episode of the What If to the offseason What If series that we did last summer. And it's going to be up to the players. It's going to be up to the coaching staff. And we'll see how this thing ultimately plays out. And no matter what, man, we'll have you covered here as well on the website, HeelToughBlog.com. We had you covered with the news after it broke about Carolina earning the number 6 seed in the South. If you missed that article, go back and check that out. We'll have you covered on all stuff pre-NCAA tournament as well. That's HeelToughBlog.com. As for the podcast, as I mentioned, you guys know where to find us. Every major podcasting platform. All you got to do is search the Four Corners Podcast, and then it will pop up. There, we encourage you guys to rate, review, and subscribe. That way you don't miss any editions of the show from the audio perspective. If you're a video consumer of the podcast, the best way to keep up with us, like and follow the Facebook page at Heel Tough Blog. Subscribe to the YouTube channel at Heel Tough Blog, or follow us on Twitter at HTB_Josh for me, at HTB Anthony for him. The links are the podcast is posted to both of our accounts. The second we go live, you'll be notified. You can jump in and be a part of the conversation. But with that, folks, it is going to wrap up this edition of the show. I do want to thank Anthony once again for hosting with me. We want to thank you guys for both watching and listening. And as always, go Tar Heels.